Welcome to Tell Me More, the all-steel podcast where design meets innovation and we explore the limitless potential of workspaces. In this exclusive series, we're peeling back the layers of workplace design. From the psychology of colors to the future of hybrid work, join us as we open doors to conversations with industry leaders, architects, and designers who redefine the modern workplace. This is Tell Me More, brought to you by Allsteel, because when it comes to designing the future, there's always more to discover.
Hi, everybody. I'm Andrea Gauss, Director of Client Solutions, and I'm excited just to share with you what we've been noodling on. Jordan, who are you? What have we been noodling on?
Who am I and what have we been noodling on? Two very important questions. My name is Jordan Arnold. I'm a Senior Workplace Advisory Manager, and we have been noodling on the conversation around connecting effortlessly or effortless connection. And I think I'd like to start with a little bit of an evaluation of where we are in this moment, Andrea, because where we are in this moment, I think, is kind of interesting as we think about this idea of effortlessly connecting, because this was not our plan. Like what we're doing right now was not our original plan. So most people will probably be listening to this. So why don't you describe to them kind of how we're communicating right now in this moment?
So the plan was for Andrea and Jordan to physically be together in Chicago using our awesome podcast room, vibing off of each other. And then the snowstorm of the century, okay, maybe just of 2024 so far, hit.
A lot of time into 2024 already. So
that's
big
right.
snowstorm.
Already. Here we are. And all of that entails as relates to, homebound children and roads that are terrible to travel on. And so I am at my home and Jordan is at our podcast room in Chicago, and it was not effortless to figure this out, was it?
It was not. It was not. And we'll kind of come back to that. But I think it's interesting. I was thinking about as we were kind of pivoting to figure out how we were going to manage this, the idea that we have some assumptions about how our engagements are going to go and we'll be prepared for those moments. But sometimes that's not exactly how it shows up. Right? Like sometimes there's a big snowstorm that comes through and sometimes you don't feel good. Like there are all these things that can happen and we need to be prepared for those changes.
And when I think back over the changes of the last 3-4 years, one thing I'm grateful for is that I think as a culture, we're more accepting of the stuff that comes up.
Yeah.
And more willing to say, hey, pop in virtually.
Yep.
I can still accomplish what we need to accomplish. We can still be productive. I think there's still some stuff that gets lost,
Sure.
By not being in person, certainly. But I appreciate that in general, people show more grace and they're more willing to get things done in a different way. And so that thinking outside of the box, I think has definitely been enabled by technology and will be kind of a theme of what we talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's get started talking about just effortless connection in general. So when we think about effortlessly connecting, as we started to attack this quarterly content, what does that mean to us?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of stickiness in it. And as we roll through this, you're going to hear us talk about people, place, and technology. But before we even get there, we had some big nuggets we wanted to tease out. And this first one is this notion that we want to create environments that bring people together, diverse people together. Right. And we want to do it in a way that's equitable.
Absolutely.
And as I've been rolling around with me personally in this, I think my biggest issue is that I tend to go back to the same people.
Sure.
And in a virtual environment, since I'm not running into somebody maybe in the hallway.
Yeah.
It's like the same people that just automatically populate that invite.
Yep.
And so I've been challenging myself as I roll into 2024 to expand the thoughts that I have as I enter into maybe even creating a meeting request. Who else could I bring along? How could I expand my network? And so that's one way that I am personally kind of trying to be more diverse in who I'm bringing people along.
Yep.
And then the other side of this is how to do it equitably.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well, and I think connection used to be, connection can mean a lot of things, right? So we're going to talk a little bit today about the different ways that we're thinking about connection. But I think the most core way that we think about connection is often human being to human being, right? And when we think about how things have changed over the last few years, that human being to human being connection, especially in the context of the workplace, has become a lot different, right? While there's more grace, while there's more flexibility, while we have more autonomy, the casualness, the naturalness that we used to be able to connect within is just not as simple anymore.
That's right.
When we think about that human to human connection. And then when we think about equity in the connection conversation, that starts to expand us into a broader conversation around like that addresses where we're showing up from, right? Like in this moment, you are showing up on my screen here in the room from Muscatine, and I'm here in Chicago because of that flexibility. But the effort that we had to put around this in order to make this happen was not insignificant in and of itself. Whereas if we were just sitting here eyeball to eyeball, it would have been a much simpler process.
Right. So that removal of the barriers to building community, we've been talking about using the word dynamic.
Yeah.
And this constant change and this desire to bring people along for the ride and knowing that things are going to be different, but we still have to be intentional.
Right.
We still want some sort of consistency and experience. And then ultimately we're driving towards seamlessness, right? That's the goal here. Someday we'll get there, maybe.
Right.
So we're also just to recognize that there's not a destination. We know that things are going to continue to evolve here, right? Our work styles are continuously changing. And as we look ahead to tomorrow, understanding too that, we just have to be ready that things are evolving. And I think that's an exciting place and time in which we're in.
Yeah.
But just a recognition that is certainly happening.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So as we kind of dive into a little bit more specificity around the work that we've been putting together for the quarter, let's talk a little bit about that kind of dynamic spectrum of how we could engage, right? So when we think about the spectrum of engagement, the spectrum of connection, to me, there's kind of two polar ends of that spectrum, right? That's we're all in person together or we are all fully remote, right? And so when we think about those two moments, especially as it relates to meetings and engagements, those two are kind of the ideal state, right?
And they're pretty rare.
Today. Like if we're all together in a room working together, not that I'm saying that's necessarily an equitable experience in and of itself, but it is set up to be more equitable, right? When we're sitting there at the table together, having a conversation, looking at each other, seeing the visual cues, all of those things are going to create a more equitable environment. Or on the polar opposite side, we have the Brady Bunch, right, of virtual calls where I can see you, you can see me, and then there's the however many other people where we're all having the same experience, right?
That's right. And so then that muddy middle is some method of distribution between in office versus remote. And I was on a call yesterday where I was playing the guessing game. There were like 6 people in a conference room and I was not physically there.
Yep.
And I was like, that voice does not match that face. Like,
Yes.
Who is that?
Yes.
Right? Like, I literally was going through, like, I don't even know who that person is talking,
Yep.
let alone feel like I could really be authentic and trust and engage in the brainstorming that was happening.
For sure. There's so much more to process, right? When you're trying to catch up, right? So if we think about those kind of two extremes, let's talk a little bit about what are some of the challenges. Like they're easier when it comes to a meeting, right? But what are we thinking about when it comes to either of those? Like I think about on the all in person side, one thing that we're talking about now is like, if we are all coming together in person, is the space that we're in safe for all that are coming together? Right. So we don't have necessarily a technology barrier when it comes to how we communicate in that situation. But we all know that the last few years have really done a number on all of us as it relates to how we come together physically. And we've been doing a lot of work on our team on the inclusive design side. So to me, when I think about that in-person engagement, how are we creating an environment that feels inclusive? And honestly, the thing I've been hearing from A&D firms when we've been here in Chicago talking about trauma-informed design and inclusive design is, I mean, the bare minimum is that we should be creating a safe space, right? Yeah. So when we think about psychological safety, when we think about if I am going to show up, I'm much more likely to show up in person and have that kind of special experience if I feel safe doing so. So that's kind of, to me, one of the challenges on the in-person side.
I would add to that, beyond the psychological safety measure, would be the shape of the table and the leader, right? Yep. So there are certainly table shapes that imply hierarchy immediately. And then from my experience, particularly in a space where you're trying to brainstorm, not so much a one-to-many type presentation mode, but in a brainstorming mode, the person who picks up the marker has all the power.
Yeah.
Right. And to see the person with the marker standing there who's whiteboarding away and, you know, how do you change that dynamic a little bit and shift maybe the power mode or the, you know, and just from a neurodiverse standpoint, knowing that there are lots of people way smarter than me in the room who just don't. They have a better filter than I do, quite frankly. Right. Or and maybe they're processing information differently.
And are maybe less comfortable sharing. Yep.
Right. And so how do you, sometimes it's easier in the all remote world that they can put something in chat. Yeah. Right. They don't have to speak it. They can write it. Yep. So there are some things about the fully remote or distributed world that I think benefit different personality types or neurodiversity in a different way.
Absolutely. So, and as we think about the kind of fully, the other extreme, right? All remote. What I often think about in that scenario, while there is benefit to kind of the equitable experience that we can have within a meeting, what I think about is, you know, connection digitally is easy, but that more casual personal connection gets a little bit more challenging, right? Like I used to, back in the day, I had a work wife named Katie Rudisil. Do you remember Katie?
Oh, I love Katie. Sure.
She was the best. But I knew, like, when I came into the office, I was going to stop at her desk and we were going to have a chat. We were going to maybe go walk over and get coffee together. We were definitely going to go to Las Lomas for lunch, probably twice a week, where they know my order very specifically still.
As you should.
Years later. But when the pandemic hit and we all went remote, those moments didn't occur anymore. Right? Those moments aren't naturally built into our day or into the way that we can connect with each other. So to me, one of the biggest things that we're thinking about, or I want to know more about what other people are doing, is how are they building those moments of human connection when we're all remote, or even not necessarily even that my whole job is remote, but that I am often fully remote.
That's right. And to peel that back a little bit, there have been recent research suggesting, I don't know how conclusive it is, but suggesting that virtual connectivity that builds trust is much more difficult, maybe even impossible, than being in person.
Sure.
And so there is something about the virtual eye contact that's not the same as the in-person contact.
For sure.
And we all know that it takes eye contact as human beings to build trust, meaningful trust.
Yeah.
And so not only do we enjoy the Katie Rudisil work wife conversation, but it built this level, this foundational level of trust.
Absolutely.
That ultimately makes you more productive.
100%.
Because you knew she had your back and you had hers, et cetera. So I think that, being cognizant, knowing that that's a new layer, especially as a leader, leader or colleague, to think through how do you build those opportunities for meaningful connection with the goal. Maybe the only goal is trust.
Right.
And that's hard for me.
Yeah.
I think we have to come to it knowing what is who are we? How do we tick?
Yeah.
And I am like I'm going to get something done. I'm going to accomplish something in this meeting.
Yep.
Like, productivity is like, that's
one.
how I feel good about what I did in the day. Right. And knowing that I need to change that perspective to one that's like, okay, the goal of this productivity in this moment is about building trust and confidence in each other.
Well, I love that. And I think you're absolutely right. Like, I think about people onboarding or starting in a role fully virtually, and like people that I've met at our org who have started over the course of the last few years that we haven't had that chance to eyeball. One thing that we're going to be doing this quarter is asking the question, like, how are people doing this? We're going to use some social channels. We're going to do some interviews to really dig into how some people are doing it. But I think about when I started on WPA, we're all remote from each other, right? Not everyone is remote from Muscatine necessarily, but everybody on the team is not local to each other. So what I did is I reached out to the team and I was like, hey, would you guys be good if on like every Friday we just chatted for an hour? Like, I didn't know some of the team members super well at that point. I knew generally, but not deeply. And we set aside some coffee talk that we still do 1 hour every Friday, where we sometimes talk about, work things, but we're there to just chat and catch up with each other. And when we're running off and doing all of these things, whether here in Chicago or elsewhere across the country, just having like those anchored moments where we have that intentional time to come and say, hey, how are you feeling? And even if it's just two of us, we'll still take that time to just chat and catch up. And that's been really, really helpful for us.
We did some quick research in conjunction with Think Lab last year, and they were asking some questions of Gen Zers in particular, like, how are you creating moments of meaningful connection? And their number one advice or thought that I thought was really interesting was, don't try to replicate something that is better in the physical physical nature.
Right.
Like, don't try to replicate, I don't know, happy hour as an example, because it's never going to be better.
It's never going to be the same.
Create something new, create a new experience, a new way of sharing. And so this individual suggested, maybe every Friday you pick one person's work to highlight. And so you're going to be highlighting that work digitally anyway. And so to be able to say, hey, look at this great idea that this individual had, or even a hobby or something along those lines. But rather than replicating, creating new as the opportunity. And that's really stuck with me.
I think that makes a ton of sense, right? The framework itself has to change. Like, reality has changed, right? So we can't just lean on the things that have worked for us historically. We have to rebuild that structure and that framework to fit the new model of the way that the world works now.
That's right.
So if we pivot and kind of move to the inside of that spectrum, right? So that distributed work, that muddy space, the wiggly space in the middle where we are partially remote and partially in person. Let's talk a little bit about that. What we've done a lot of work on for this quarter is this conversation around digital equity, right? And I think that's particularly meaningful in that wiggly space, right? So what does digital equity mean? Why is it meaningful to you?
Well, to me, I think to everybody, we've all been on a journey here of the nervousness of logging onto a call and how does my hair look and what does my background look like? But we're past that point, right? We're way past like, hey, dummy, you're still on mute. Oh, thank you, right? We're past some of that stuff. And we moved into just, how can I want to be heard. I'm here for a reason. I got invited into this conversation for a reason. And how can I show up in my best way to support the effort of the call or of the conversation, of the meeting? And we do it differently, and I think about members on our team or across our organization, and some people hit the raised hand button because they want to interject, and other people just type it into the chat, and I'm the one that's constantly interrupting and apologizing. And so I think all of that, we're trying to figure out a dance, and the dance is different than it is in person. And the dance is even that much more complicated when part of the group is in person and the other part is virtual. And I think we've all been in that experience where you can't hear the conversation around the table because I'm not seated at the table.
Right.
And so I think that is ultimately the goal, is how do you help everyone feel like they have a seat at the table, whether they're physically there or not?
Yeah, I think there's two levels to it, right? There's this logistical level of hearing and being heard, right? Like, do we have all the right tools to help me physically hear what's happening in the room? And it's like, are the pucks in the room so I can hear, or is the sound set up in a way that I can hear? But then also there's the location bias that can happen for the individuals in the room, where they're only affirming the ideas that are coming up in person. They're only really listening for what's happening in the room. One of my least favorite things is when I'm the virtual caller and someone in the room, there's like a side conversation, like a whisper conversation happening that I can see is happening, but I have no idea what they're saying. And she was like, it's even worse when they hit the mute button, right? When they visibly and specifically exclude you from the conversation, right? And as the person calling in, that doesn't feel great, right? It's really hard to be the person within that conversation. And I think the reality is, Pandora's box is open, right? We have this level of flexibility and autonomy, and to your point, grace, that maybe we didn't have before. Like, we're not putting that back in the box, nor do I want to, right? Like, I don't think we want to put that back in the box. So it is important for us to figure out how is it possible to make it work, to make it feel equitable, to make it feel meaningful. And I don't think it's as hard as sometimes we think it is, right? Like, I think there are simple things that we can do and consider as we start to explore that. And you mentioned this earlier in the conversation, but we really think about it in kind of 3 categories, and that's people, place, and tech. So if you're up for it, let's kind of talk through what those could mean, right? So if we think about the people category, what are we thinking about there? Where do you start?
For me, the people starts with the unwritten rules, the behavioral norms, the protocols. And so even before you're talking about they put you on mute so you can't hear, when we're all in person, I remember being in meetings where clearly there were 2 people texting each other.
Oh, yeah.
Very clearly.
You can see it in the face.
Just say it out loud. Right? Whatever's going on, just say it out loud. I think there is this etiquette. We all talk about the meeting that happens before the meeting and then what is the meeting after the meeting.
Yes.
How much more beneficial it is to just happen and get it all out. And it's even that much more difficult because in addition to the putting you on the mute, there's also the people virtually hang up.
Yes.
And then there's physically those who still remain and what is being discussed. So I think rolling all the way through, having norms. I love the norm that people schedule 50-minute meetings, not 60.
Sure.
Because at 50 minutes, people who need to physically get up and move, use the restroom, whatever can, or you've given a little bit of buffer so that the after meeting conversations can still happen while people are still on the phone call. And there's a formality to the meeting is now over that you can still state and then still even give a little bit of buffer for the sidebar conversations, if you will. So I think that is 100%. I think there's also giving people forehand knowledge of what the purpose and the goal of the meeting is. So that they can show up in a little bit. And that's just good meeting practices, whether you're all in person or all remote or there's distribution happening.
But that also changes maybe how I come to the meeting. Like physically, do I physically come to the meeting? Like I know there are meetings that you and I have attended that I have come in specifically in person for because I thought other people were going to be there in person, only to find out that it was you and me.
It's you and me
in person and everyone else virtually. And so there is this element, like if we're thoughtful in our preparation and we can let people know what the expectation is, right? If the expectation is that we're all virtual, then that makes life easier. We can all be virtual. If the expectation is that we're brainstorming and we're coming together and we're going to kind of power through something, not that you have to be there in person, but I might have a preference for being there in person. So I can make that choice and I can come in and
you mentioned location bias. And we found a statistic that 8 in 10 executives prefer in-person meetings versus virtual. And we just think about that right then and there. And the conversations I've been in with executives, both within the H&I as well as other organizations. And it is the power very clearly feels to be around that table. Right. And so how do you make a transfer of power to people who are being piped in? And I think it starts with cultural norms and expectations and having the leader recognize those on the phone, pull them into the conversation, talk to them, say their name, recognize them as individuals. And I think that's an important first step.
For sure. And I've even heard some suggest to have not only the kind of leader of the meeting in person, but having a secondary meeting leader that manages the remote attendees. As in they are in the room, but they are the voice for the chat. And they are the voice for someone who might have their hand raised where they can more easily interrupt and say hey, I think Andrea has something to say. The person who's leading the meeting and kind of running it has a lot to manage and a lot on their plate. So potentially having a secondary person that can help be that voice is something that I've also heard that could be really helpful in those scenarios.
That is a great idea. Just to have, because if you're leading the meeting, you've got your agenda in your mind, you're thinking through the next thing, and then pretty soon you're like, oh, there's 16 things in the chat, and I heard them. No, I think that's super valuable. So lots of things around people considerations, and I think a lot of them you should think about regardless of the considerations are about where people are physically, but there are additional responsibilities. And I think as a leader or as a member of a team, to just think about, let's just lay some groundwork. If you kick off a new project, you kick off a new, it's a new year, it's an okay time to reframe some things. And just take advantage of that. And I think everyone will benefit. Ideally.
Ultimately. Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about place. So we talked people. Let's talk about what are some of the things that we think about relative to place and digital equity.
So place is about, obviously the physical space that you're occupying. And there's lots of ways to frame this up a little bit. We've talked a little bit about what is the privacy element, how much enclosure is there, posture and orientation towards the camera. To me, this is the simplest and best thing you can do, just especially if you already have agile tables. Like, classroom setup is the worst way to participate in a meeting with people, just physically as well as virtually. So orientation, huge one. Adjacencies, what's going on the other side of the wall. Like we mentioned, we established it's a snow day here in Iowa. I sent my kids outside to play. They're building a snowman. So that's what I did with my adjacencies right now. And then, lighting and acoustics are like that next one. Like, you can't see the person at the end of the table. You can't hear them. So the physical setting is hard. But I also know that, as individual employees, there's a limited amount of what you can affect in terms of change. But I think there's a few examples we could talk about quick here.
And the other thing that we think about too is this idea of size of the space. And what you and I have talked about is this idea that the rooms that are set up for success, right? Like true hybrid meeting experiences. Are all rooms universally equipped to have that kind of meeting? Because the reality is, many meetings that you might think are in-person meetings can evolve into a more hybrid experience, right? So we want to be set up for that. But B, doing that allows the room to be used in the right way. So as an example, I think we have at 505 tried to find a hybrid room that's ready to go, but the only one available is like a 30-person training room. Right? Is that the best way for us to engage in this meeting? And would it be more beneficial for someone who has a 30-person meeting to have access to that? Right? So this idea of that tech being enabled in a way across the or across the rooms, so that I can make the right choice for my meeting as opposed to choosing the training room because it's the only room equipped with what I need. Then let's talk a little bit about the tech side too. As a non-tech company, what is our stance on tech?
Yeah, I think, first of all, and you were just getting into this, our number one piece of advice is just make it similar, right? Have the logons be the same between the spaces and the buildings. Orientation can be somewhat simple. Having a way when you're booking your meeting, whether you're using Outlook or something else, to be able to have people understand really simply how many people, is this virtual meeting enabled, etc. There's lots of fairly inexpensive technologies that can be invested in to make it more tech enabled and more simplistic, which obviously we'd be happy to get into. But I think the number one thing is to optimize it, make it simple, and make it consistent. And that would be the number one piece of advice that we would give.
Yeah. And I think about some of the things that we're doing here at 345 that I absolutely love. And like, this is not an endorsement of any specific like tech company, but some of the things that we are trying to do is, for example, in a larger room where there could be 8 people sitting in person, we're using tech that actually breaks up each person's, it's going to sound aggressive, breaks up each person's face into their own into their own little Brady Bunch square. So that means that if I'm calling in, I can see the face, to your point earlier about not being able to even know who is talking. I can see and recognize who is speaking. I even love that it lets me see the visual cue that, Andrea is going to share something. I'm going to wait a moment. And then it stops us from like that, like back in like the layering over top of each other and like, oh, sorry, no, you go. There's that piece of it. And then we're using other pieces of tech that are smart, as well as it relates to kind of how the audio works and how all of those pieces come together to create an experience that feels like I'm in there. Or even like whiteboards, right? Like a whiteboard that can be utilized by someone calling in or someone in person, as opposed to like us in the room writing on the back wall and then sending you a picture for your participation, right? That doesn't feel as inclusive or as equitable.
That's right. And so you were talking a little bit about viewing angle of the whiteboard, viewing angle.
Yep.
So, this kind of gets back and forth between the place itself and the technology, but we've played around with layering of the furniture so that if you don't have this cool Brady Bunch technology, you can still see the individual faces. They all can see the screen. And I think it's really important to think about the typology of the meeting. And so sometimes not every space can really perform the function of what you're wanting to do the same.
Yep.
Some meeting spaces should be set up for a one-to-many type presentation.
Right.
It is a show and tell. I'm showing up, I'm presenting information. That is a different type of setup for optimize than one where we're asking everyone to participate.
Yeah.
And so that many-to-many conversation is very different than the one-to-many. So when we look at the floor plans, we're in the middle of looking at what are the 3 major floor plans that we're seeing utilized by clients today? And the space typology that is up on all 3 of them is enclosed meeting spaces. So just to make that a priority and to vary the sizes, whether it's, a 2 to 3 person meeting room, up to 6, 7, 8 is important. And to make that a number one destination. And we know that those space types are highly used, highly occupied, and should be prioritized.
Absolutely. So I think a couple minutes left here. I got one question left that I want to know the answer to. And I can start with mine. So the final question that I want to talk about is, as we've been developing this content, as we've been working through this, what has been a kind of a learning or something that felt meaningful as we've gone through it? And I can share mine first. And what was interesting to me in going through all of this work is that the biggest thing that came out of it is that sometimes effortlessness requires a significant amount of effort, right? This idea that we're talking about, this idea of effortless connection, because we want that in the moment. But the reality is, in order to get to that moment of effortless connection, it can actually be relatively effortful. Like there are things we need to think about from a technology standpoint. There are things we need to think about from a place, from a cultural norm standpoint. Those are all things that need to be addressed and thought about and prepared for in order to create a scenario, in order to create a world where that connection can feel effortless. So as we have more autonomy, as we have more flexibility, as we have more capability to work in the way that's best for us, it requires then that the structure that we build for effortless connection, it requires that we put some effort into that in order for it to work effortlessly. So for me, that was not that I'm shocked that was what came out of it, but the reality is that is so much of it.
I read somewhere that when you're getting ready to do a presentation, so much of a percentage of your brain is focused on the task at hand. What you're going to say, how you're going to present, how you're going to answer the hard question that is going to come your way. I think the thing that I've been excited about is just to see how things have evolved over the last 3 years.
Yeah.
And the new norms that are being established, the new technology that's becoming more and more available. We all started, Miro board was like lifeblood to so many of us. And now we're seeing whiteboards being enabled via Zoom and Teams and other technology platforms as well. So I think that's exciting to for a long portion of my career, technology and capabilities and interactions were fairly static.
Sure.
And we really are in a period of history that rapid change, rapid innovation is happening. And so I think that's, the optimistic side of me likes to think about that maybe a little bit. And also from a perspective of being a mom and the tension I used to feel on snow days and the amount of I would call everybody I knew and ask my parents to drive 50 minutes through a blizzard so that I could make it to work. How insane is that? And the flexibility that has come through this. there's a lot of, not everything around technology evolution is bad, and I'm grateful for that.
Absolutely. Any final comments or thoughts as we wrap this up?
Final is so final. I don't know.
I mean, we'll continue the discussion, I'm sure. I'm excited about what we're talking about this quarter. I think to me, it feels super relevant. It feels super meaningful. I'm having this conversation with most clients that come through the space here in Chicago, and I would say it is rare for someone to share with me it's not something that they're thinking about, or not be interested in the conversation if it wasn't something they were thinking about before. So it feels universal, it feels meaningful, and it feels like a good time to be having this conversation.
I agree. One quote I find really, really interesting, and just one thing, I'm just going to read it.
Hybrid working risks creating a dominant class of those who feel like they're central to the organization and strongly committed to it, and then an underclass of those who feel peripheral and disconnected, not only from the work, but also from the social life that creates meaning and bonds employees more closely to the organization.
And so I've been thinking about who is the dominant class, who's the underclass. Yeah. And as I we kicked off the conversation earlier today, just around how can I expand my network? How can I think about those who are in my own dominant class? Not that I have my own, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And try to broaden that and help people not feel like they're on the peripheral, but they're more consistently a part of the conversation. And then even, as that translates into the times where a team of remote individuals come then together for some really cool experience, whether for us national sales meeting or design days or whatever it is, how are we making those same meaningful connections beyond just have human connection, physical to physical connection in the opportunities that we give them. So
yeah, I love it. Well, thank you for taking the time to chat today, and we'll be talking again soon. That brings us to the end of another fascinating episode of Tell Me More. We hope you enjoyed this deep dive into effortlessly connecting. If you enjoyed this episode, stay tuned for the next episode in this series featuring Jason Zielsdorf, where we'll discuss in-person connection and acoustic inclusion. Until then, subscribe to this podcast and connect with us on social media. Thanks for listening.